Whilst some speculative creations can often be lambasted for being over-the-top death monsters, most of these are typically carnivorous. But something that also caught my eye with some people discussing it of late was the notion of herbivores partially joining in on this trope, sometimes called the hyper-aggressive herbivore trope. But on the other hand, herbivores can often be written off as useless, defenseless fodder just waiting to be eaten by the predators. And hyper-aggressive ones may be something of a pushback to that notion. So let's take a look into the already existing natural world to hand to see just how herbivores defend themselves, how much they stack up in aggressive interactions with others, and how much weight there is behind such tropes. Despite most Spec Evo projects and the like occurring in areas where man never arose, went extinct, or hasn't arrived yet, interactions with humans can provide a starting point to ask, just how dangerous can herbivores be? And it may surprise you that the answer is very. With the exception of crocodilians in Africa, herbivores are routinely more dangerous than carnivores. In Yellowstone, bison are the most dangerous animals, with far more attacks than bears or any other predator. Elephant and hippo both outclass lions and leopards in Africa. And in some areas of India, elephants significantly outrank every other animal with people killed, with wolves being second, and insectivorous sloth bears being the main suspect in other areas. So I would say that yes, on average, herbivores are generally more dangerous than carnivores when it comes to mammals at least, and the science quite literally says so. Ability to kill and behaviour as a predator isn't a guarantee of killing, and many predators are very risk-averse animals unwilling to get injured. But why are some herbivores dangerous? Let's go through a few prevalent examples to look at assorted behaviours to try and find out why, and how this could potentially be applied. First off, I will exclude instances of injured animals here. Whilst some species like bushbuck are typically unassuming but can be famously dangerous when wounded and cornered, this isn't a typical natural behaviour for healthy individuals, and they rarely if ever initiate conflict without provocation. Instances discussed here will be where the herbivores are the ones to typically initiate. In some cases, it can just be as simple as territoriality, and an animal often praised as Africa's most dangerous, the hippo, is pretty well known for not being keen on sharing their water. Animals chased into or otherwise entering areas of water they're resting in are sometimes killed, and they generally don't tolerate other aquatic life of a certain size getting too close to them as well. It's worth noting while out grazing on land, hippos rarely show this same level of aggression to the same animals. And it seems to be as simple as hippos just not taking other animals entering their water bodies very well. When everyone needs to drink in the dry season, it seems this is all it takes for their reputation as ultra-aggressive to form. African buffalo present something slightly more complex. Also famously aggressive and dangerous to hunt, they're also very well known for their hostile predator-prey relationship with lions, which is something well worth exploring in detail in regards to this trope. Dietary studies often lump in all kills or species for a population, and don't usually split things for certain individuals or social groups, giving the impression that most prides occasionally take some buffalo. But rather, outside of unique specialist prides that have learned how to take very atypical prey, there are effectively two types of lions: those who hunt buffalo and those who don't. Those who don't only rarely attempt it, and when they do, they aren't especially good at it, often getting chased off or generally making a hash of things. Those that do actively select and trail buffalo herds within their territories, and when possible, rarely hunt much else. They can best be described as professional in their methods, acting out learned behaviours with great skill, frequent success, and often having distinct roles in the group for a swift, efficient, and fairly uniform takedown. As a result of this, buffalo change up their anti-predator behaviour. Whilst either fleeing or fighting are fairly universal, buffalo will adopt a new set of behaviours when they're so frequently hunted by lions. The herd group up much more when moving, and generally strays aren't seen as much in the more compact formation. Anything that may well hint at a threat undergoes considerable scrutiny before the herd consider it safe and move on. and the pathfinder individuals will occasionally halt the rest of the herd to strenuously check the area ahead before they move on. They may also engage in prolonged flight after attacks, moving much further and at greater speeds than normal flight to gain more distance from their attackers. But this can only be taken so far, or the herd risk losing the calves and juveniles. And finally, there's preventative aggression, essentially getting them before they get you. Buffalo will readily attack any lions they encounter, and when resting, buffalo bulls in the herd will often select for areas of dense cover nearby, where they stand motionless, seemingly in ambush for any lions that may approach. Instances of buffalo killing lion cubs are likely preventative aggression. Jonathan Scott recorded 2 cases of marsh pride cubs killed by buffalo, and George Schorler reported several cases inflicted on the buffalo hunting lions of Lake Manyara. Reciprocal aggression, whilst generally quite common, both in buffalo and herbivores, also can't be ignored here. No matter how skilled and experienced a group of lions is, even a single buffalo is an immensely powerful and dangerous animal, more than capable of putting up a fierce fight. Buffalo will kill lions too with some regularity, with 4 cases of adult lions killed in just 18 months in the Luangwa Valley, all from attempted hunts. In the making of their film Relentless Enemies, on the lions and buffalo of Duba Plains, the Jouberts recorded one specialized pride ultimately fall apart, after enough pride members were killed by buffalo, and similar safari literature is also filled with records of lions killed by their quarry. No matter how much experience they have, it seems these buffalo specialist lions are eventually outdone by their prey. In one study from Ngorongoro, buffalo were actually the leading cause of mortality in lionesses, making them perhaps the only known vertebrate prey species to be the top cause of death for its predator. Buffalo are perhaps one of the few animals that live up to their exaggerated reputation in the 21st century. And in general, it seems the famous aggression of the buffalo is proportional to the rates at which they're hunted, as are select behaviours not seen otherwise, and they're only seen in systematically hunted herds rather than being universal across the species. So for this example, it's a behavioural response to high predation making them so uniquely dangerous. Although it could be noted buffalo reciprocal aggression can be bad enough to start with. Elephants are well known for their belligerence, but a lot of this may well come from seasonal changes in behaviour brought on by fluctuating hormones. Bull elephants undergo a period known as musth, which is effectively their elephant equivalent of a rut loosely. It can occur at any time, and is behaviourally characterised by eagerness to mate, but chief of all, significant aggression to just about everything. Visually, it can be identified by the constantly dripping genitalia of the bull, that also gives off a very pungent and recognisable odour. Androgens spike significantly, chiefly testosterone and dihydrotestosterone, and this is what causes the signature aggression. This also serves as a mark of the animal fitness. Both are synthesised from cholesterol, a fatty acid, so musths can only be achieved if the animal is in good enough health, and the bulls also don't forage as much when in musths too. The longer the animal stays in musths, the healthier it is. But elephants can also become more aggressive from social factors too. One famous incident comes from Pilanesberg Game Reserve in South Africa, where young reintroduced bulls killed numerous rhino and were generally very aggressive. This was sorted out when mature bulls were introduced, and since then it's been found that mature bulls serve something of a social buffer for younger ones, having something of a calming influence and reducing aggression. In their absence, young elephant bulls direct a lot more interspecific aggression at surrounding animals, that dissipates when the old ones show up. So for elephants, it does seem it's a mix of physiology and behaviour that can cause such aggression. A final example could be diet. This is cheating slightly, as the point of discussion is hyper-aggressive herbivores, and this example by its nature includes omnivores. But said omnivores do have the majority of their biomass intake coming from plant matter, and most examples are still ungulates, and in the spirit of the trope they are typically viewed as mere prey items, so I think they could be worth including. Suids and hippos will occasionally engage in carnivory, either scavenging dead animals or appropriating the kills of carnivores. In hippos, it's not known exactly what they gain from this, but it is believed to be tied to nutritional stress, as they're really not adapted to eat meat. Suids are much more generalist though, and bush pigs especially are an example of some pretty bold omnivores. Bush pigs will occasionally bulldoze leopards off their kills to consume them, and like many pigs will readily scavenge meat in general. Surprisingly, bush pigs will also show up to lion kills too, but often with decidedly ungood results for them, and they will often be killed by lions at their kills, more out of competition than for food as they're not eaten, though it seems bush pigs are somewhat unpalatable to lions too. They are pretty tough though, and have been recorded to kill leopards although the circumstances are unknown. They are also generally tough customers for young lions, and even large males too. So even if cheating somewhat, it does seem fair to include this in some of the possible reasons why good herbivores can go bad. And it could be worth noting that this is something of a dual reason, in that it can be just normal breadth of diet like with pigs, or aberrant nutritional stress like with the more purely herbivorous hippos. This branch of the trope is most associated with suids or suid-like animals, especially since the rise to public prevalence of entelodons from walking with beasts. And as the evidence shows, that's not necessarily wrong either. Sometimes the classics are classics for a reason, and the good old hell pig hits its mark. So we have a good few examples that can be pretty universally adapted to assorted fictitious settings. Extreme territoriality of a unique and limited environment as with the hippo, and whilst it's hard to think of another environment outside of water that this could be applied to, burrowing animals feel like another possible choice to use this angle. In Cape Buffalo, we have a response of hostility proportionate to the rates of hunting from a top-order predator that caused new behaviours to come about, including preventative aggression. This one is fairly easy to apply and speculate on, and who knows, could have been the case in the past with some common prehistoric herbivores and their predators. Elephants are fairly clear-cut cases of either hormonal changes akin to a rut, or more specific behavioural ones that would be applicable to animals of higher cognition and social structure. And finally, the omnivore route is fairly easy to adapt to other settings too. It's worth noting these aren't all the possible reasons a herbivore can show lethal aggression. These are just some of the best studied examples and are here to provide some deeper context to well-known instances of it too. We can extrapolate a few of these reasons to some speculative herbivores too. Diablos are fairly antisocial, but the cows do go through a months-like period in the breeding season and when gravid that makes them a lot more dangerous. But even then the normal individuals are pretty belligerent, and this may come from harassment and overambitious attempts at predation from multiple species, leading to Diablos using preventative aggression to cancel any threats, before they can become a potential issue. Poor eyesight and lack of real discrimination mean innocent species like Baroth can be fatally caught up in such aggression too. Feructus bulls live in bachelor herds much like elephant bulls, until they become fully mature and claim a breeding herd. As said, lone individuals may become flighty and hostile if away from older males, and the direction of aggression to third parties rather than their own kind is occasionally seen in agitated animals. The particular individual slain by Hayes in the events of the film seems to be a mature bull and an impressive specimen, and it isn't quite as clear where the aggression came from. It's possible it was just disturbed by the flares and gunfire. Feructus bulls respond to things they don't like by confronting them head-on. There are a good few myths as well. One regarding black rhinoceros especially, that they have poor vision, and are so on edge due to the fact that they're easy to surprise. But this is actually a falsehood. Studies show black rhino have vision as good as a cat or a rabbit, so not bad for a mammal, and can see relatively well overall, enough to identify people and other animals from some distance. Cases of black rhino aggression to vehicles are very often poor guiding etiquette blamed on the animal's bad reputation, but there are also cases of rhino defending themselves with lethal aggression too. There's at least one case of overambitious lions attempting to attack a black rhino, and getting hit with the old chat feces exit the species. But there are multiple cases too of black rhinos seemingly approaching resting lions from a distance and killing one of the pride. It's not clear what exactly brings this on. Rhino-lion encounters aren't all that frequent, and rhinos don't undergo muths, So it does seem that it could be as simple as black rhino attempting to terminate things they categorize as threats. Many of these were from the same individual too, so it could be that some rhinos are just very belligerent on an individual level. So with some background added, just how common are hyper-aggressive herbivores? How many are there in the larger family? And what percentage very roughly in each ecosystem? For the sake of argument, a hyper-aggressive herbivore was defined as any herbivore that had confirmed, reliable, instances of them killing predators, and displaying at least semi-frequent hostility to them outside of predation attempts. Of roughly 278 species, which was non-cetacean ungulates and elephants, 15 were found to fulfill both categories, so roughly 5% overall. On a habitat basis, 9 of 19 large herbivores, 47%, in Africa, where the Kruger National Park was used as a habitat example, fulfilled both categories. 3 of 10 large herbivores in the Indo-Gangetic Plain, 2 of 8 in North America, where Yellowstone was used, and 1 of 5 in the Brazilian Pantanal, which averages out to roughly 30% of large herbivores being in the hyper-aggressive category. As said, this is a very rough count, but it does give an idea of what percentage can be expected and what's reasonable. It's worth noting that the clearest indicator of what could lead an animal to be in this category is size. The more intact the guild of initial Pleistocene megafauna seems to correlate with a higher percentage of animals in the category. And size may well be an important factor, as the bigger you get, the less good you are at fleeing, which is still the preferable method of avoiding predation. Getting good at fighting back and becoming hostile seems something of an answer for animals that can't run away very well. And most of the animals in this category were just generally very large animals. But it's not a perfect correlation, and there are some anomalies worth mentioning. Despite their enormity, Indian one-horned rhino and Asiatic elephant both failed to make this category, due to a lack of them being recorded to actually kill predators, and the relatively small warthog and white-lipped peccary both got in, despite not being especially large. For the most part, family didn't seem to have much bearing outside of the relatively well-represented suids, but it still does seem at any size, fighting is used when fleeing or other methods become unviable due to other aspects of morphology. It's also very worth noting on this overall subject that fighting isn't the be-all and end-all of success, and it's actually not a very good thing to get into. A quote from Mieszewski's book on buffalo that's well worth just reading out in its entirety: "The only certain way of avoiding death or serious injuries is successful flight, which, using game theory concept, is the highest possible payoff in this dual game. Being able to run away and run away well is a good defense, the best defense being one where there isn't risk of being killed. Making your chief predator repellent a risky engagement with said predators is just that, risky. And the riskiest method, arguably, because there are so many other ways of defending yourself. Fleeing, crypsis and camouflage, vigilance, using terrain, and more are all valid options. In the Spec Evo realm, there's definitely still a lingering air of assorted who would win forums. It's not uncommon to see people say X is underrated or Y shouldn't be counted out, and invariably it only ever seems to pertain to their ability to fight. Caprids are awful at fighting. They struggle to use their horns effectively without a run-up, and there's good photos of a cougar killing a larger bighorn ram without much struggle, because they chiefly live in areas where the predators aren't as common, and occupy terrain where launching an attack can be potentially lethal. There are 3 separate incidents of cougars falling to their deaths mid-attack on bighorn rams, and whilst the ram also fell, there are more sheep in that area, but it'll take a while for another cougar to draft in. And chiefly it shows the lethality of simply occupying certain terrain. Similarly, there's a record of a wolf falling from a cliff, albeit surviving, while hunting Dahl's sheep. You don't need to fight when just reaching you can be lethal. Similarly, impalas are crap at fighting too, and are viewed as meat by just about everything. This matters little to an impala, and their kind have been on Earth near enough unchanged for over 3 million years, far longer than any of their far more recent Pleistocene or late Pliocene predators. That's real, measurable evolutionary success of far greater value to a species than killing 1 or 2 of your attackers. I imagine it's not great to see your original creations get dunked on. But then once you abandon the mentality of interspecific combat being the chief thing to judge an animal's worth on, it'll become a lot less meaningful, and there are far more interesting things to discuss. The same drum is often beat in paleo circles too, and it's generally become viewed as ceratopsian mighty, sauropod big, ornithomimids fast, and hadrosaur meat. A great post on this once again comes from Mark Whitten's blog, where he discusses ceratopsian horns and their potential roles that's well worth a read, linked in the description. A few caveats I did want to add to it though. It is correct to say that weaponry isn't necessarily needed to become immune to predation. Being big, tough and strong do well enough, as with the examples with dehorned rhinos. But for a herbivore to be lethal though, it does seem that horns are the most common route. As I did say, fighting isn't everything and so on. But with that said, for speculative purposes, horns are the most common and potentially most effective weapon. Rhinos may not need them for defense, and can kill smaller animals like hyenas with sheer bulk presumably. But for larger animals, they'd require their original armaments, and have killed animals the size of hippos with them. Some animals do seem to have horns specifically for predator defense too. Gemsbok have records of them killing large predators with them and are notably dangerous. Predators are cautious of the horns, and often have to employ specific tactics to get around them, so great is the threat. It's also suggested Gemsbok calves grow their horns so quickly relative to other antelope, for this purpose specifically, and can become a more challenging kill at a very early age. Similarly, I've already gone over buffalo-lion relations already, but most kills recorded do seem to be horn or perhaps boss-based. All of this isn't to argue entirely against the post, just that horns are somewhat getting doubted as weapons, and whilst Whitten doesn't, some have gone as far to say that they're borderline useless for defense or offense, when this isn't the case. Not all ceratopsians had effective horns for such tasks, and some weren't even horned at all. But ceratopsians with sufficiently pointed and angled horns almost certainly would have used them, and effectively, when we look at dangerous herbivores. Not all horns are lethal, and horns aren't the only method of defending yourself, but horned animals typically use their horns first and foremost to defend themselves regardless of efficiency, and even surprisingly garish horns can be used successfully with lethal intent. But I think these two are the most relevant conclusions overall from the article. I did just want to add that in response to horns getting so devalued. Horn and antler morphology is interesting, and could provide a potential sequel to this if people are keen. Finally, are hyper-aggressive herbivores deserving of attention? And if comparable to modern animals, then yes, absolutely. Because such herbivores aren't just hostile prey items, they often fulfill major roles in ecosystems too. As said, buffalo are major prey for lions in certain parts of Africa, but they were once incredibly common herbivores, with some early records suggesting them as the most common ungulates in the continent. As recent as the late 80s, entire populations of buffalo were still getting completely wiped out due to the catastrophic rinderpest epidemic, and they lost much of their range in a decline that was virtually silent compared to the much publicised poaching of elephants and rhinos, or the extirpation of bison. Bison themselves would have no doubt fulfilled important ecological roles at their maximum densities in the United States, and were also a chief prey for wolves, the top predator in the area. Moose are also a vital prey item for wolves in some parts of their range like Canada and Scandinavia. The role of elephants and hippo and their effects on vegetation and waterways respectively is well documented. And through bulk grazing, rhinos reduce major fuel loads and reduce bushfires. In short, if they're sharing similar ecology or behavioural traits to animals in our world, then through their relationships with other animals and the environment, a good chunk of hyper-aggressive herbivores should get top billing in such projects. Not exactly because of their predator fighting abilities, but more everything else. So rather, I don't think the trope is overused, or bad, so much as the animals created with it in mind should just be more fleshed out in other aspects of their lives, and have a good reason for being so hostile other than just to buck trends. So obviously I lied. This got released before the next Monster Hunter video. Surprise. I had this one partially made and thought no time like now to release it, whilst I weigh up whether to postpone the Curio video due to the special Malzeno variant that was announced, plus to give it more time to generally research things for it as well, as it is an elder heavy video, but it's still on its way at any rate. Thanks for watching, especially to top patrons Big Al and Phenomenon for their ongoing kindness, as well as K. Sandom, Erengar Steiny, Flygon's Archives, Sassy Birdo, Evilly, Howleth, Archosaur Queen, Seth Fake Last Name, Zaysir, Carazol, Dodecablos, and Bazugazu Bakuhatsu Bakumatsu for their continuing support. If you're interested in supporting the channel yourself, there's a link to the Patreon, and I'm grateful for any amount you feel you can give. Likes, shares, and subscriptions are also all appreciated. Comments too, especially for any further tropes in Spec Evo and such you may be interested in seeing explored. I do read as many as I can, and try to use some in future videos in at least some way, and hopefully I'll see you for the next one, which will be a Monster Hunter video.